Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about some of the complaints again that are on the forums, specifically in regards to the current meta and how a lot of people are saying it's a burst or be bursted meta and that there's very low counterplay going throughout the board. A couple people rediscovered Riot's old design philosophy article from a few years back where they basically outlined how they wanted to design around League of Legends and how they wanted the game to be played. And I think that there are some interesting ideas there, but a lot of people were immediately holding it up and saying, well, there's no counterplay at all in the game currently, and Riot are going back on their word, and they don't want counterplay, and this game's going down the shitter, as it usually is, but the complaints are fairly loud this time around, so I figured I'd go ahead and take a look at what people are saying and kind of talk about whether or not they have a good point. So first of all, counterplay. That's the big sort of buzzword everyone's going on about, is that how Riot no longer is bouncing around having counterplay in League of Legends, which I think is not true in any way, shape, or form. See, so what counterplay is, let's go ahead and break that down first. So counterplay is essentially what can you do in order to play against a certain champion or a certain ability. And ideally, this is not just be away from the champion, be anywhere but next to the champion, right? Because otherwise, there's not a lot of counterplay, because that way, when the Zed shows up out of the bush, if the counterplay was be somewhere else, well, you already failed the counterplay, so you just die. That feels pretty bad. So good champions have lots of this counterplay or very obvious forms of counterplay. A good example of this is Zoe, actually, where her bubble is a fairly slow-moving skill shot, so you have opportunity to move out of the way. If you do get hit by the bubble, your allies can step in the way to body block and prevent her from getting the almost doubled amount of true damage that she would normally get from landing it. She has to use her portal jump, which puts her between two very obvious points, so it allows you to land crowd control or land damage when you know she's going to be there. Again, her Q is another fairly long-range skill shot, but a fairly slow-moving skill shot, I would say, which gives you time to either juke it out of the way or to get someone to body block it for you. There's a lot you can kind of do about Zoe's abilities, right? There's a lot of opportunities for you to outplay that. Another good example is Sion, where every single thing he does is super telegraphed, but if you are able to land his abilities, he's going to do an absolute ton of damage, a ton of crowd control, and just eviscerate you. So that Sion is usually held up as a really, really good example of a high counterplay champion who's also satisfying to play, because just having counterplay doesn't mean you're bad or weak or anything. It just means that there are things players can do to basically prevent your damage or prevent your crowd control or do something about your champion. And in this regard, there's a lot you can do about Sion, but if the Sion plays it well, or if you misplay, you're gonna die. But in no situation do you ever feel, well, there was absolutely nothing I could do about the Sion coming at me. You always felt, I could have interrupted his Q, I could have juked away from the Q, I could have avoided the E, I heard the ultimate coming, I should have expected it was gonna come to my lane. There's always something you can kind of think about when it comes to Sion. Now, for a bad example, Wukong is a bad example, a low counterplay champion. So first, Decoy is great, because that ability has a lot of really interesting mind games and things you can do to play around it. If I'm a player playing against Wukong and suddenly he stops moving, there's this interesting mind game between the two players where it's, well, did he use the decoy? If he did, I don't want to keep focusing the clone. In fact, I want to move away from the clone. But if he didn't use decoy and he's just trying to fake me out, I need to keep focusing that guy. But when does he actually use decoy? There are a lot of interesting ways to kind of play around that and to kind of think of, okay, what is this guy actually doing? So that's great, but everything else is bad, because Wukong's passive has nothing you can do to outplay it. It just gives him free resistances, so it inherently has to be very poor amounts of resistances, because otherwise there's nothing you can do about it, right? Wukong would just become very tanky without having to build tank. And then Wukong just kind of EQRs the fight and either kills everyone or dies instantly. There isn't anything you can do about that, because the Q is an auto attack modifier, which you can't dodge. Obviously, you can mitigate it with some champions, but that's not really global enough counterplay, because only people like Jax can really do anything about it. Jax or Teemo. The E is a targeted dash, nothing you can do about that. And once he's on top of you, he presses R, and there's nothing you can do about that, other than flashing away from the initial E. That's it. That's the only counterplay Wukong has. And that means that when a Wukong is ahead, it feels really bad to play against, because there's essentially nothing you can do about any of his damage. If he's ahead and you get in range and he comes at you, you just kind of die. And there wasn't a whole lot you could do about that. And that's sort of an example of a bad counterplay, low counterplay champion. Another example is Diana, who kind of lands her one skill shot and then presses R a million times and you die. Again, not a whole lot you can do about that other than don't be near them. And that's really disappointing. And these champions are these champions are the ones that are being kind of cherry-picked to show the example. Like, yeah, of course these champions are going to be doing a lot of damage to you without a lot you can do about them, but that's not because Riot have suddenly decided that they don't want counterplay in the game. In fact, these champions haven't been touched for balance in, I would say, years, at least significantly. Obviously, numbers tweaks, that sort of thing, itemization has been changed around, but there hasn't been significant balance changes and significant kit changes for either one of these champions in a long time. So, essentially, what the problem becomes is that you can't really use these champions as an excuse to say Riot doesn't care about counterplay anymore, because they've existed the whole time. Just not a lot of people played them, maybe they were bad for other reasons. But either way, they are low counterplay champions, and there's a reason they're on the rework schedule, because they need to have higher counterplay, they need to have something else going on for them, because otherwise there's really nothing players can do about them, unfortunately. So, I think that's one of the biggest complaints that people are giving, is you need to look at the actual champions and say, okay, well, is this something new? Now, looking at Pyke and looking at Zoe, who are two recent examples, they both still have a kind of burst playstyle, but they also have counterplay around everything they do. If Pyke goes for the immediate Q, he doesn't get the pullback. He gets a slow, which is nice, but he doesn't get the pullback. His E is on a delay, so you can avoid the damage and the stun, provided you're able to juke away from Pyke instead of standing in one place, right? You can avoid that. Even his ultimate has counterplay, because if you're not in the X when he lands, you won't take any of the damage. So in fact, one of the things I've noticed is if you walk at Pyke when he's trying to ult you, he'll quite frequently miss because he's ulting behind you because he thinks you're going to keep running, and then when Pyke misses his ultimate, well, he doesn't have any more damage to come through. So there's a lot you can do about Pyke, and I think there's a lot of counterplay to Pyke. And sure, you can argue, yeah, well, none of the damage I ever do to him sticks, but I kind of counter that by saying Pyke can't build health. So even though, he almost needs to be able to heal off all of his HP, because he can never be more durable than he basically starts the game with, or the health he gets from leveling up. So if he didn't have the heal, Pyke would eat maybe 1 or 2 skill shots, lightly damaging skill shots even. It wouldn't have to be something like a full Syndra combo or anything. And he would immediately have to recall, because he would be chunked so low, he can't build any HP, that he would effectively be unable to function anymore. So I think he kind of needs that sort of passive. So and it does have counterplay, just in that he's squishy burst him. So that's one of the things I'm kind of talking about, where there is definitely counterplay to a champion like Pyke. There's counterplay to a champion like Zoe, as we've kind of talked about before. And these are recent examples of champions that Riot have just put out. If we look at even reworked champions that they've recently done, let's look at Aatrox, for example. Beforehand, all Aatrox ever did is auto attack, which means that if he was ahead, there's not a whole lot you can do, because all of his damage is like guaranteed to come out. New Aatrox, a lot of his damage is very telegraphed, and in discrete areas of effect that you can see and avoid or mitigate. Sometimes the best counterplay you can do against Aatrox is run directly at him, so he won't get the edge hits on his first 2 Qs, and that's a lot of damage he's missing, that's a lot of healing he's missing, and Aatrox is not that tanky. You can kind of build him with some health, but he's really not a frontline tank in the sort of sense. He is a fighter, so he doesn't have that much durability, so there is a lot you can do about Aatrox because of how telegraphed everything he does is, and that's a recent example of Riot reworking a champion to give them counterplay. So I think sort of the arguments that there is no counterplay and Riot don't care about counterplay kind of fall flat on its face. I don't think that's really the case at all. The other thing I want to talk about is the sort of burst or be bursted meta that everyone says. A big complaint is that every champion is doing way too much damage, and if Riot just nerfed damage by 10 to 15% across the board, everything would be fine. Now, I don't see a lot of champions doing bursting outside of assassins, who should be doing that, and burst mages, who also should be doing that, or some other champions who are very, very far ahead. So yes, if you get super far ahead on Vayne, and you already have your 3 items by the time the enemy champion has finished there first, then yeah, you're pretty much going to be killing people in 3 hits. But that doesn't mean Riot have trying to get the game into a burst or be bursted meta. That just means that one champion is particularly far ahead. And if you look at a lot of the other champions that people routinely complain about for instantly killing me, they're either the sort of outliers that I've already talked about in terms of Diana and Wukong and these other champions that don't have high amounts of counterplay, or they're champions that are just that were just insanely far ahead at the time, or you have to look at the situation. If I'm an AD carry and I have 0 defenses built whatsoever, and there's a Zed, and he comes at me and he 1v1s me, that's not an example of burst or be bursted. That's an example of the assassin did his job against the marksman that was all by himself and not full items and didn't have anything they could do about the assassin. That's kind of just the ecosystem. A marksman should lose to just about everybody in a 1v1. They should be strongest when with their whole team who's helping to peel them and protect them and otherwise keep them safe, is sort of my thing. And so you can't really use that as an example of, well, Riot I should have bursted Zed before he bursted me. No, you should have died there. One of the biggest offenders people always make is Master Yi, how they say, well, this guy just shreds tanks. There's nothing you can do about him because he's a targeted gap closer. But the thing about Yi is he bursts even less hard than a lot of the other champions I've talked about. He generally won't kill you with a single Q. He needs at least a few auto attacks, no matter how far ahead he is. It's just, again, the sort of champion that kind of preys on people being all by themselves and unable to do anything about this because they don't have their friends nearby. And of course, he's going to excel in a 1v1. So it's the sort of situation where, yeah, durability doesn't do you a whole lot against him, so even if you're a tank, you can't split push against a Yi because he's gonna kill you. But he does have very telegraphed abilities again, and he's very squishy if he builds full damage. So once you know he's alpha striking, you know generally who he's alpha strike to, you know who's gonna appear next to, and then as long as you can put your damage on top of him, Yi usually dies in short order unless he's able to either get his team to peel for him, or if you have literally no crowd control left to interrupt the meditate, which I usually find isn't the case. There's usually something you can still do about him. So it's sort of the case of, I don't think that Riot are attempting to get anything to burst or be bursted. I think for the most part, though, because of and this is sort of me going off on a tangent, so this may or may not be right. I think the rest of everything, I think I've been pretty clear about, but this is more of a tangent than anything. But I think, if anything, people are playing the game in a style right now that is very prone to being exploited in the early game. There's a lot more of, well, I fell behind early, I need to get kills back in order to equalize the bracket, so to speak. Or, you know, I'm going to play all these weird champion picks because marksmen are bad and I don't want to play a marksman. And then they end up in situations, they end up in very volatile lanes where there's not a lot they can do if they fall behind. If I'm playing Aurelia bot lane, for example, and I go 0-3 in lane, well, what else does Aurelia bring to the table besides damage? She doesn't really have that much crowd control. See, she has an AoE stun, that's nice. She has the disarm cage, that's nice. But she's mostly there for damage, and if she's not doing damage, there's not a whole lot else she does. So an Aurelia that's behind tends to continue falling behind. For example, obviously there are other examples of champions like this who have low utility and they can't do that much else. So, and these are the kind of champions. These are the kind of situations where people are saying, well, I just have to burst them immediately, and if I fall behind and I can't do anything, that's Riot's fault. Not really so much, but this is just kind of a thought on my own part, thinking, why would people think that Riot are trying to have high burst or have, you know, low counterplay champions? I don't think it's that much of Riot trying to do that. I think it's just the current meta and a lot of people trying lots of weird things and weird positions and that sort of a thing. So, but those are just kind of my thoughts on this whole subject. Let me know what you guys are thinking of the whole counterplay thing, or burst or be bursted, whatever the hell that is. Let me know what you guys are thinking of all that down in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. And if you're looking for more Grab the Lantern content, you can check out my blog, link down in the description. I upload an article just about each and every single day for your enjoyment. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.